So I want to a tremendous thank you to Rabbi Cohn. When I approached the CRC a number of months ago, saying, I'm getting a number of helpful Shemittah questions, and I don't really know anything. So I asked them if they would be happy to give a shir. And like always, they're always extremely helpful. It's a great resource for the community. Without any negotiations, right away we agreed. So I want to thank Rabbi Cohn. This is really the first of the community-wide shir on the helpful Shemittah. And I don't want to take any more of his time. Rabbi Cohn is the rabbinic administrator of the CRC of the Kashrus division. And it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm moving your recorder. Okay, good morning, everybody. We're here to talk about Shemittah. We all live out of Eretz Yisrael. Well, at least for now, we live out of Eretz Yisrael. So our focus is going to be on how the laws of Shemittah affect us. To a certain extent, how they affect us here in the United States itself. To a greater extent, for those of us who may be visiting during the year, we'll be in Eretz Yisrael where it's more very, very practical what's going on with the laws of Shemittah. And a little bit we're going to touch on those of us, not me, but any of you, who may own an apartment in Eretz Yisrael, who have your own rules, even if you don't actually go there during Shemittah, something that affect you. A little bit about that. Okay. In our discussion, we're going to start off on a... I don't have what I have. Sorry. Look on to your neighbor. In our discussion, we're going to start off on a more halachic, shir style, some laws we need to understand. And then as we move on, we'll get into a little bit more practical and some demonstrations. Okay. In the more halachic part, I'm going to mention 5 significant shilas, 5 significant questions that a person needs to speak to the rabbi about. They need direction on those, and not every rabbi is going to tell you the same answer to those questions, and they're going to play a big role in how each person keeps Shemittah. So if you want, I'll tell you what our position would be on it, but really, if each of those 5 major questions, those are questions that are really to be posed to a rabbi, either here or in Eretz Yisrael, when you're thinking about food, because you'll see how each one of them is go. Okay. On the page that I give you, on the first side, it looks like this, the green side. Okay, this comes from the introduction in the Sefer Derech Hamuna. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a set from Chaim Kanievsky, a truly amazing sefer, a pirush on the Rambam and Hilchos Royim. Okay, and in his part on Hilchos Shemittah, and he has an introduction. And in his introduction, he says he lists off there are 7 mitzvahs that we have for Shemittah. Okay, I'm going to go through them. We'll go through them quickly. Okay, the first one is, we're not allowed to look on the land. Okay, you're probably familiar. We're not allowed to look on the land. We'll talk about that a drop as we move along, what you are or not allowed to do on the land during Shemittah. The second is, everything has to be hefker. That means if I own a tree, I own a field, and things grow during Shemittah, I have to let anybody take it. It's free for anyone to come in and walk into my area and take it. The third thing is something called svichen. It's a rather significant thing. We're not going to talk about it later, so I'll give you a minute on it now. Svichen means anything that has to be replanted each year. That means vegetables, spices. Anything has to be replanted each year. If it grows, even if it grows by itself and nobody replanted it, the Chachamim said you're not allowed to eat it. They were concerned that people would plant it themselves, and therefore the Chachamim said any of those things are called svichen and the rasam. Okay, number 4 is hefsed. We're going to spend some time on this as we move along, which is you're not allowed to waste or ruin anything that's made that grows during Shemittah. 5 is schara. You're not allowed to do business, transactions, buying and selling in the normal way that you do during Shemittah. 6 is beer. That's a mitzvah that at the end of Shemittah, at the end when produce is no longer available in the fields, you have to make the produce that you have hefker. You have to allow anybody to take it. That means as I went out to a field, there were apples growing on a tree. And as I told you, the apples are hefker. So I took someone's apples. I took 20 apples into my house. Now there are no more apples left on the tree. I have to take all my apples and put them outside. I can't be hoarding 20 apples at this point anymore. I have to put them outside. And there are rules of exactly how we have to do it. But once there's no more available for everyone to take, I can't keep them for myself, and I have to put them out and let anybody else take them. And the last is Shemittah Ksafim, which is at the end of Shemittah. That means in a year from now. Come Rosh Hashanah of next year, any loans that people owe are canceled. That applies even to people not living in Eretz Yisrael. So come the end of Shemittah, you'll hear about this from the rabbi, I'm sure. Come the end of Shemittah, any loans that Jews have with each other are canceled come the end of Shemittah. There is a way to get around, so to speak, get around it, which that's what you can hear about it, which is something called a principle. You'll hear about it at the end of the year. You have to sign a very simple document, and if you sign that document, then, for whatever magical reasons that works, all of a sudden you can collect the loan. Okay, but the rule is the loans are canceled. If you don't sign a principle, then your neighbor owes you $10, the loan is canceled. Okay, come the end of Shemittah. Okay, so those are the 7 basic rules of Shemittah. I'm going to keep on going, but if anybody has questions, feel free. I'd rather not talk for the next 45 minutes. Okay. How do we know if something that grew has or doesn't have is considered a Shemittah product? Okay, what we call Kedusha Shemittah. Does it have the laws that it has all the rules of Shemittah? So I'm going to talk about a few ways of figuring out what does or doesn't belong to Shemittah. Right? So the first is as follows. If you go to Eretz Yisrael now and you see grapes growing on a tree or apples growing on a tree, okay, this is the season, they're just becoming ripe at this point in the year. Is that considered a Shemittah product? Right now, it's on the tree today. It's, a month into Shemittah. Shemittah started at Rosh Hashanah. Is that apple considered a Shemittah product or is it considered a product of the 6th year? Okay, which one is it? I mean, that apple grew basically in the 6th year. So is it a Shemittah product or is it a not Shemittah product? What happens the opposite? What would be is next year, if we have apples that grow, basically grew during Shemittah, but they were still on the tree when Shemittah ended. So now after Shemittah, are those Shemittah products or they're not Shemittah products? And the answer is, the rule is as follows. All fruits are judged by when they grew a third. So we have an apple, that apple grew a third during the 6th year, with the exception of vegetables. Vegetables and herbs go by the time that they're picked. Okay? And that has a very practical application for us as follows. In Eretz Yisrael, there is a tremendous exporter of herbs. Herbs are planted every year. So herbs that were harvested the day after Rosh Hashanah are considered to be herbs that grew in Shemitah, even though they grew, most of their growth was before Shemitah. Those herbs that were harvested were grown from Shemitah. Peppers, a lot of peppers come from Eretz Yisrael. Those peppers that were harvested after Rosh Hashanah are considered to be Shemitah peppers. So it means that if you walk into the fruit store today and you see a pepper that has a sticker on it that says it's from Israel, that pepper has the status of being a Shemitah produce. We'll find out what that means in a second, but it's Shemitah produce. And that has effects on how we have to treat it. If you walk into the fruit store today and see an Israeli persimmon, persimmons also come from Israel. If you see an Israeli persimmon, that's not a Shemitah produce yet. Because those persimmons didn't grow mainly in the 7th year, they grew in the 6th year. Okay, but then as the year goes on, so vegetables from Shemitah come first, and as the year goes on, we start getting fruits from Shemitah, and fruits from Shemitah last into the year after Shemitah. Okay, so I mean, the whole Shemitah year, from now till next September, is going to be vegetables and herbs that are coming from Shemitah. As far as fruits are going to come starting in a couple of months from now through, let's say, Hanukkah or Pesach of next year. Okay? So that's just from what you have to be alert for which things come from Shemitah and don't come from Shemitah. Okay? If it's, yes?
As a practical matter, is there a fixed date, like on an herb, on the product?
On an herb, no. No, it's not like if you walk into the store, you're going to see when was this pepper pulled off the tree. You wouldn't see that. But if there's a pepper today, they didn't pick that before Shemitah, before Rosh Hashanah. I mean, you could sort of, on your own guess, that they're not picking that from Rosh Hashanah. If you're picking a fruit, I don't know when they picked the fruit, but it didn't. Again?
There are athletic charts available.
Yes. If you live in Eretz Yisrael, they have charts that help you know exactly what was picked and what's being harvested at which time. But I'm giving you a rough idea, which is to say vegetables is during Shemitah, vegetables and herbs are during Shemitah, and fruits tend to be from the middle of Shemitah to the middle of the year afterwards, or roughly like that. Okay? To be, if it's helpful to you, it's too late now, but on most fruit, vegetables, either the sticker or the box says on it the country of origin. You can look for yourself to see where the product comes from. You can also, if you go to Hungarian or to City Fresh, both of those stores their fruit is under hashgacha to be sure they don't bring in produce from Israel that has a Shemitah issue. Okay? So those are stores you can shop in safely, knowing that you don't have to look at the stickers, look at the boxes to know where it comes from. You know you're safe in those places. Okay, now the next thing is, I'm talking to you about fruits. I keep talking about fruits and vegetables. But the truth is, Shemitah applies to a little bit broader group than just fruits and vegetables. It also applies not only to fruits and vegetables that are fit for humans, it also applies to items that are only fit for animals. Okay, so as an example, most of you probably don't see this, but alfalfa, most alfalfa, I know there are people who eat this, but most alfalfa is served for animals. Okay, alfalfa is a Shemitah produce. Okay, so if you had an animal and you grew up, or you grew alfalfa, that has the rules of Kedusha Shvius, the rules of Shemitah apply to it. And as we go on, you'll find out why that's so relevant to us. That actually plays a big role in our show over here. Okay. I don't know if this, how many of you don't have to raise your hand if it makes difference to you, but I just saw a tshuva from somebody about whether medical marijuana is or does not have Kedusha Shvius, because one of the rules is that, well, it's fit for humans, at least in many states, it's legal. It's fit for humans, but the rules as follows. Items only have Kedusha Shvius if they're fit for humans or animals in the normal, typical way of eating or using under certain rules, but things that are only meant for people who are sick are not considered to have Kedusha Shvius. So as long as we keep calling it medical marijuana, and then does not have Kedusha Shvius, it's not for your average person, okay? Now, maybe in some states it's legal, it's for everybody. Yeah, that's correct. That's if not if that's Kedusha Shvius. There's a question about tobacco also. Tobacco also is a similar shiloh, whether it does or doesn't have Kedusha Shvius. Okay, for any of you who are... What? It depends. If it has Kedusha Shvius, then you have to eat it only in its best way. We're going to get to it. If you put it into intravenous. It's a good question. Then we're going to find out what it means. I didn't tell you, if it has Kedusha Shvius, you can eat it. We're going to find out soon what that means. First, we're just trying to figure out what is or is not in the rules that we're going to talk about. Okay. The next thing. Yes?
So mid-year, when the person is shopping anywhere for fruits and vegetables, or let's say for vegetables, it becomes very problematic as to which peppers or other things might have Kedusha Shvius.
Right now, already peppers. If you saw peppers in the store, if you went to Costco, I don't know if they're selling them now, but they often sell them. And you see peppers that say they come from Israel. Those peppers have the rules of Shemitah to them. Now, I haven't told you what that means, but those are Shemitah produce. What that means, we'll find out soon. Well, okay, who cares? You're allowed to eat. You're supposed to eat Shemitah produce. We'll find out in a second what that means. Yes.
Is there a way of differentiating this? That it's individual. Is there a way of differentiating whether or not it was because it was done, not whatever, or whether or not it has Kedusha, which is.
I'm going to get to that sort of. I'm going to talk about that. As we talk, so far I'm just trying to just help you figure out what is or isn't in the rule, in the question, and then we'll get to what does it mean that it's Shemitah produce. Yes. Grains.
Like vegetables.
They're like fruits. They go by, everything grows by a third. Grains and legumes go by when they're a third grown. So that is to say, now it's not the time of year that you harvest, but if you had planted something in the summer and you do a third during the 6th year, it's a 6-year produce. Grains that if you plant with a winter crop, and it depends by when it's a third grown. Okay, the next is, what about flowers and herbs? Anybody want to guess if they do or don't have Kedusha Shvius? You don't eat flowers, okay. What do you think? You just have Kedusha Shvius? And
Why? You sell it.
you sell them? Okay, well, again, first you have to decide if it's something that has Shemitah rules. Like, for example, if a tree, a piece of wood, lumber, it doesn't have Kedusha Shvius to it. It grows in the ground, but no one eats it. It's not meant for eating at all. It has no, connection at all to eating or uses in certain ways that would be forbidden. Really, it's not only eaten, but not in a way that could be forbidden. You're allowed to lumber from Israel that has no special rules to it. Because there's actually a question, not for today, about whether bamboo may have Shvius rules because it's not exactly just lumber. Okay, but really lumber, if there are pine trees growing and you cut them down and you want to use lumber out of it, you're okay to use it. Okay, so the rule for flowers and herbs, there are 4 types of flowers and herbs. Okay, 4 groups. The first is there are some that are used directly for food, like roses. We're using making rose water. And rosemary is an herb. Okay, so herb and spice is very similar to each other, but it's an herb. It grows in the ground. It's a very fragrant plant. You don't really eat rosemary. I wouldn't say that you eat it, but you put it into food. It has a direct food use, and those for sure have Kedusha Shmitas. Those for sure are within the rules of Shemitah. The next grade down is items that are sold specifically for their fragrance. They don't eat them, but they're sold specifically for their fragrance. I'm working on exactly getting a handle. If I could give you a better example. For now, I'll say lilacs. Okay, they're specifically grown for fragrance. They have a beauty to them also, but they're specifically people buy them because they're fragrant. I'm working on the details, but for now, I'll say that. Oh, 1 second. There's a question in the Yerushalmi whether those do or don't have Kedusha Shvius. Something that's grown specifically to give fragrance, but it doesn't. It's not. If you don't eat it, really, it's not like you put it into your food. That's a question in Yerushalmi, and the din is that we're not clear about that. We treat those as if they have Kedusha Shvius. Okay, you don't eat it, but you do use it. You buy it specifically for the fragrance that it has to it. We consider that to have Kedusha Shvius. Okay. A step down. I'm going to take your question in 1 second. A step down from that is flowers that are primarily bought because of their beauty, but they happen to incidentally have a fragrance to them. Okay, when you walk into a flower store, it smells wonderful. Okay, that doesn't mean you bought everything because of the fragrance. You walk through a garden and it has a pleasant smell to it. That didn't mean you specifically buy it for the fragrance, but it happens to come along with it. Shem's trying to attract the bees with the fragrance and with the color. So the ones that are sold for color incidentally have fragrance. There are those who held that has Kedusha Shvius. So that's not the din. The din is it's very accepted that those do not have Kedusha Shvius if they have just primarily for beauty, but they happen to have a fragrance incidental. Those don't have Kedusha Shvius. And the lowest category are the ones that have no fragrance at all. Okay, just a plain old something growing on the ground. They're my kid's favorite, dandelion. Okay, they don't have any fragrance in them. So those of course don't have Kedusha Shvius. Okay, did you have a question?
Yeah, what about Hadassin?
Excuse me?
Hadassin?
Hadassin, because their fragrance are considered to have Kedusha Shvius.
So would you have a rule of...
So I forgot to say, I was going to say it later again. I missed it the first time, but I'm going to say it later, that there's a very significant question. When I mentioned to you that fruits are treated by the year that they grew in, that they grew the third in, you're going to have more significant question about buying an esrog for next year's Shemittah. If this year's esrogim were from the 6th year, but next year's esrogim that come from Israel are going to be Shemittah esrogim. You're going to have very significant questions, including Hadassim, a little bit of a question. I don't have a question that the rabbi is going to speak about when it comes before Rosh Hashanah. Okay, that's not for today. That's the end of Shemittah question. I don't know, not a question. It's going to be a very important topic to talk about how you buy an esrog come the end of the year. We're going to find out. I told you, you're not allowed to do business with esrog. You're not allowed to take Shemittah products out of Israel even. So how are we going to order esrog and how are we going to get them? How are we going to buy them? And all these kind of questions the rabbi is going to talk about. I'm not talking about that today.
Are you going to address that you're not allowed to take Shemittah produce out of Israel?
Briefly, yes. You are not allowed to.
Wine?
Why you're not allowed to?
Wine?
Wine. Let's talk about the wine. Yeah, I'm going to get to the wine in a second. Yeah, I'm going to get to the wine. Okay.
So that's ethnically like in Israel, when there's Shemittah produce that I'm allowed to eat.
Yes.
Whatever reason, I can't, for sure, I can't bring it home.
So, it's very interesting. You're not allowed to take it out of Israel. You are allowed to take enough, like for your meal, for your trip. So if you want to take a sandwich for the way home, that you could take. For what you need for the trip, you could take. You're not going to get much further than that because at customs, that it can take away all your fruits and vegetables anyhow. But if you want to take something for the trip, that you're allowed to do. But you're not allowed to take meaningful amounts. So I mean, the esrog sellers are going to buy 500 esrogim. They're not buying one. If you want to buy one, because you want to eat it at home, that's okay. That happens to be. So you have a sandwich with you, that's okay. You have a snack for your kid, that's okay. But if you're taking it out because you want to take a whole package of it, that you can't do. Right, you can't buy a pack of spices that's going to last you for 6 months. Right, you could sprinkle some onto your salad, but you can't take a whole container of it. That's correct. Yes.
These points you just made, is that only related to food and what it means like fragrance? Are you talking that it affects the food eater, or just does it apply even if it's, let's say, a lilac? A lilac, I know it's perennial, it's not
yes.
annual.
Yes.
So that may have a difference. But if let's say if it's an annual and there's an adverse fragrance, does it apply even if it's just for smell?
Yes, we're going to find out soon that, like, for example, you can't do business with it. So you can't walk into the store and give the person $1 and buy that flour from him because it's a Shemitah produce. You can't pay for it. We're going to find out a little more about that in a second, but you can't walk in and give him $1 and say, give me a flour, because you just did business and all kinds of reasons why you can't do that. It's not just if you eat it.
Right, that's an annual, but how about, let's say,
Perennials have
like a lilac?
similar dinim. Yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, apples are perennials also, right? It's not only for things that are annuals have more serious issues. And that is because I mentioned something called svichin, something that's planted every year. You're not allowed to use it even if it grew by itself. Perennials have a little bit lighter din, if I could use the word. Okay, so now, yes?
So if you have, let's say, a hydroponic flower, that's a seed, that's a seed from Israel, is that the problem?
You're saying you grow it in the U.S. and you get hydroponics from there?
No, in Israel.
Okay. I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm going to sort of talk about the hydroponics in a second. Give me one thing first before I get to that.
Where's coffee?
Where is coffee?
Like coffee.
Coffee beans is a fruit. That's a fruit. It goes by when it grows by a third. It grows on a tree, but anything else. Do I know when it's picked? I don't know. I don't know if there's any coffee growing in Israel. It's a tropical. I don't know if it grows in Israel, I should say. I don't know if it grows.
Stuff like that.
Excuse me? Yeah. I don't believe so. No, I don't believe they get any action from Israel. Okay. So I mentioned flowers. I did mention flowers. Aside that, just for the interest of it, it is worthwhile to know that Israel is a large exporter of flowers. That's something that we do a lot of exporting of. Flowers are not labeled in the same way that fruits and vegetables are. It's much harder to know whether you have flowers that are an issue. It's something that actually at the CRC we're working on right now to try to get a better handle on what they export and which of what they export are the kinds of flowers that are an issue. And they're only the ones that are meant for fragrance. So that's what we're working on. I mentioned I'm working on that right now. We're deep in the middle of that right now. To try to help people understand what they should or should not be looking for. Okay. The next question is going to be the first of our questions. When I mentioned there will be 5 questions you have to ask the rabbi. Okay, if you could turn this page over to the mat side. And then it's as follows. The rules of Shemittah only apply to things that grow in Israel. That's not what I said is not 100% true, but let's take it at face value. Basically, they only apply to things that grow in Israel. They don't apply to they go to things that grow in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, in the biblical land that belongs that Hashem gave to the Yidden. Okay, it does not apply to everything that's just because it's labeled as coming from the political state of Israel does not automatically mean that meets the halakhic requirements of what is and is not Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so in the United States, this question is not so relevant to us to a great extent because if we see a package that came from Israel, there's no way we're going to be able to dig out, did it come from this part of the country or this part of the country? It's not so easy for us to figure it out. For people living in Israel, this is much more of a relevant question. They're more on top of what's coming locally. And there are 2 major opinions as to how to decide where, particularly the southern border of Eretz Yisrael is. Okay? The southern border of modern Israel goes all the way down to Eilat. If you look on the right picture, you can all see that on the very bottom where the water is, that's where Eilat is on the bottom. So the political border is all the way down at the bottom. Okay? At the very bottom of that map on the right. Okay? There are 2 major opinions as to where the southern border of Eretz Yisrael is. Okay? And to help you understand it, the Torah gives us the southeastern and the southwestern markings of where Eretz Yisrael is. On the southeast, the Torah says that at the bottom of the Dead Sea. Okay, that's pretty easy to pick out on the map. Okay, on the bottom of the Dead Sea. Okay, so roughly, you can see roughly where that is. If you can recognize it, it's the blue on the right side, the middle of the right side of the map. Okay, the bottom of the Dead Sea. Okay, on the southwest corner of Israel, the Torah says it's by something called Nachal Mitzrayim. A Nachal means a wadi, which means it's something that only has water in it during the rainy season. It doesn't have water all the time. It's a wadi, or in Hebrew call it a Nachal. Okay, and almost everyone agrees that refers to an area called Wadi El Arish. El Arish is a city. If you look on the map on the left side, you can see it in the left corner of that city. If you could read the little handwriting on the side, it says El Arish. It's a city in the Sinai. And the wadi that comes out from that place, most people understand that to be Nachal Mitzrayim. Okay, so we have the southeast and the southwest markings of where the bottom of Eretz Yisrael is. The Torah gives some in between, and there's disagreements as what the in-between cities are. You look at the left map, you see there's different ways of drawing the map. Okay? But by and large, one opinion says the way we draw the map of Israel is, now if you look, to make this easier, look at the right, at this map. Okay? It's the green. Okay? The border of Israel goes where the green is in the map. That is to say, it goes from the bottom of, on the right side, from the bottom of the Yam of the Dead Sea, around, no, it doesn't go, it goes all the way around where it's green. Okay, so the southern border of Israel is along this bottom line. I don't know how to describe it. It's the other version, the other way of looking at it says the border of Israel goes down till the 30th line of, I've got this latitude longitude, whichever one it is, the ones that go east-west, whichever one it is, the 30th degree of something, okay? As you see on the line, there's a black line drawn across the map. That's the most strict opinion. They say the border of Eretz Yisrael goes all the way down until there. And that leaves this big chunk of land, which is the northern Arava, what's orange on this map, the northern Arava, as a question. Some people feel that that is out of the borders of Eretz Yisrael. That does not count. Produce that grows here is not considered to go to Eretz Yisrael. For example, lots of dates, medjool dates, if I pronounce it correctly, medjool dates. Israel is a major exporter of medjool dates. It's a tremendous part of the world market. A lot of them come from this area, from the northern Arava. Okay.
The oranges.
I didn't say oranges, no, I said dates.
No,
The orange, yes, the orange in the map, yes, the orange in the map. So according to some people, that's not in the halakhic borders of Eretz Yisrael, so the rules of Shemittah don't apply. Everything's fine over there, okay? And others, the stricter opinion says no, all the way down to the 30th line of latitude. One of you knows, I remember, whichever one it's called, according to the third one, which is almost down to Eilat. As you can see, it's almost all the way down to Eilat. That's considered the borders of Eretz Yisrael. The purple is for sure out of Eretz Yisrael. What's purple in this map is for sure not considered to be in the halachic borders of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, but the orange is what's questionable. Okay, the orange is what's questionable. Is it or is it not considered to be in Eretz Yisrael? So in Eretz Yisrael, when you buy produce, some produce is marked as coming from the Arava, so the northern Arava. Okay, and that's what it'll say on it, and that's to tell you. That's like I don't know what to call it. They're letting you know that this is not Shemittah produce according to some people, and it is Shemittah produce according to other people. It's a disclosure. That's the word I'm looking for. A disclosure. It's a disclosure. You should know that this is grown from that questionable area that some opinions think is Eretz Yisrael, that some think that it's not. Okay? So that's a first serious question. Now, in America, it doesn't apply to so much, but people traveling to Israel have to know what is their position on that piece of land. What do they think about that? Okay? Most, if it means anything to you, most of the Mahadran Hashem, most of the Hashem that try to do on a higher standard, consider this to be Eretz Yisrael. Okay? Most of the not Mahadran Hashem, the regular, so to speak, regular Kosher Hashem, consider this to be out of Eretz Yisrael. Okay? So that's a difference of opinion on that point, whether this northern Arava is or is not Eretz Yisrael. So, again, it's not so relevant to us because things that come from Israel don't tell us with such detail where it came from. I don't have an official position that I can tell you. I suspect that we would take a more cautious approach. Okay? So that is to say, if something came in packaged and it said it come from the northern Arava, I suspect we take a more conservative approach, but I'm not sure. I don't have an official answer on that. Yeah.
We don't know. Why does that make it?
What I mean is that you go to the store, you buy pepper. Okay? It says it came from Israel. Okay? You just assume that it came from the, so to speak, regular part of Israel. We don't have any way of digging into it and figuring out did this pepper come from someplace in the Arava or did not come from the Arava.
It doesn't make it work.
No, I didn't say question. So it's not going to help us anything. It won't be to our benefit to know that. In Israel, you buy a package that says it came from Arava, then you know that you now depend on this. But for us, we're sort of stuck not being, we can take advantage of it. Yes, we don't get to take advantage of that even if you want to be making that. Right. Correct. Yes. Okay. The next question is, what happens to produce that grew in the greenhouse? Among the other things that Eretz Yisrael is famous for is their tremendously advanced technology in growing produce where it's really impossible to grow it. Okay? Lots of Eretz Yisrael is not easy to grow in, and they have had tremendous amounts of technology they export around the world, the technology of how to grow things in the not perfect conditions. Okay? I've seen it myself here in the United States, Israeli technology being used to grow products in the most unusual places. Okay? One of the things that they do is they grow things in greenhouses. Okay? A greenhouse is a controlled environment. I'm not referring to a greenhouse which is just a greenhouse built on top of a farm. I'm talking about a completely independent building. Excuse me. Not one kind of greenhouse is you take a glass box and you plop it down on top of your field. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you build a floor, wall, ceiling in the middle of no place. In the middle of the desert. The CRC was once asked to give hashgacha to something growing in a greenhouse in an inner city. Okay? Someone was trying to reclaim the inner city. Okay? No one's seen a blade of grass in this inner city in 1,000 years. You know what I mean? This is like, there's nothing growing. This is not like things are growing. Okay? They plopped this down on the middle of concrete, and they wanted us to give hashgacha on what was growing. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. So there are two reasons why this might be permitted. Okay? Two reasons to think that things that items that grow in the greenhouse are considered permitted. And those are, in brief, there's reason to believe if something grew not attached to the ground, it grew in soil but not attached to the physical ground, like, the earth itself, that might not be having rules of Shemittah to it. That's one reason why it might not. So, for example, someone had mentioned about hydroponics. Is the same kind of question as this is. It's not grown in the ground. In hydroponics, it might not even be grown in soil at all. It might be grown in water or some other material. Right? That's one question. The second question is, there's a reason to believe, based on the different Yerushalmi, there's a reason to believe that anything that grows indoors does not have the rules of Shemittah. Indoors, it's called Zereh Babayis. Anything that grows in a house, indoors, anything that goes indoors is going to have the rules of Shemittah, regardless of the fact that it's not attached to the ground. Okay, two independent reasons why it might be wrong. That's the first reason. The first reason has to be not being attached to the other. The second is just like growing in the house, and maybe it's Xeris Kussim. The pasuk that teaches us that you might not have Shemittah for that produce. So, in this is called...
So growing fruit trees and big flower pots, I'm impressive.
I'm going to get to that in a second. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Not right now. It's going to pause that.
Okay.
I'm going to get to that soon. Okay, so this is referred to in Israel. The product of labor is called matzah menutach. Okay, a disconnected bed. Okay, that is to say, the product is grown on something that's not connected to the ground. Okay? And there are many different standards of how that's done. Some people allow just about anything. Some people, there's different rules. But overall, there are many people who allow anything that goes in a matzah menutach. The bed, the whole bed where the item is grown, is separated from the ground, and it's grown in the greenhouse. They allow that product to say it's not Shemittah produce. It could just as well be grown in Chicago. Okay, it's not considered to have grown in Israel. And others do not allow such products. Most people do. Most people do not consider it to be Shemittah produce if it grew in a matzah menutach. Okay, and, again, in the name of disclosure, it often says it on the package. There'll be a sticker that says, if you could read Hebrew, matzah menutach. Okay? We sometimes, before Pesach, if you get lettuce from Israel, romaine lettuce from Israel, they will have a sticker on it that'll say matzah menutach. Or you'll see a salad that says on it in little letters matzah menutach. Here, the disclosure is not so great on the American side, but in Israel it's more blatant. It's out there for everyone to see that it's grown this kind of a day. This is
Explain why they can say that it's still the dirt from Israel, though it's growing in the pot.
So your question is, why should it not be considered? Because the rule is that only things grow in the actual earth. I don't mean earth, I don't mean soil. I mean on the part that's attached to the ground, that's considered to be grown in Israel. To the point that even those who said we should sell the top 3 inches of the soil to someone else, to someone who's not Jewish, and that might help us, okay? But that's not what's done. But the fact that it's not attached to the real ground might be enough reason. It's a halachic detail. It's only considered grown in Israel if it grew in the ground. If it grew in a pot, it's not considered grown in Israel. Okay? So it's a technical. I'm not getting into the gory details of it, but there is such a question. Okay. Most are makel. Most take a lenient approach to that and say that if it grew in a matzah menutach, it did not grow in Israel. Does not have the rules of Shemittah to it. Okay. So if you see product like that, if you see it labeled like that, you're good. Yes, good. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the holes in this when I get to his question about the apartment. People have trees in the apartment. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But for now, I'm talking about the produce that you buy. If you want to buy a salad, you want to buy a bag of lettuce, and it says on it, it'll say on the family pack. This is a question they deal with. This is my second question I would say to ask your rabbi. Here, in this case, most take the lenient approach. We would take a lenient approach on that. That those products are not considered pepperoni issue. If it's done right. Again, in the details, there's a lot of details on here and how it's done. And I'm not giving you that. That's for them to fight with each other. But by and large, if it's done on my family pack, we'll allow it. Okay. Now I'm going to move to something many of you I'm sure have heard of, and that is something called the Heter Mechira. What is Heter Mechira? Is that when large amounts of Jews first started coming to Israel in the late 1800s, the situation was very difficult, and things were very hard for people to survive. At that point, when Jewish people first started becoming farmers, the earlier people who had come were not in the farming. That wasn't what they did. These people started farming. Things were very, very difficult. And came Shemittah, and to them it was like hopeless. I told you, on Shemittah you can't work your land. You have to leave everything to the Heter, anyone can take it. It was like, we're barely surviving day to day. Excuse me, how are we going to make it for a whole year of not working the land? And some, at that time, great Rabbanim told them that what they could do is the following: they could sell their property to someone who was not Jewish, and then the land would not be considered to have the rules of Shemitah to it. That's what they were told. They were told that the Jews should not do should only do very specific work on the land. They shouldn't do everything. It shouldn't become a free-for-all. But they were told, yes, they could sell it. And others, as equally as prominent, vehemently disagreed with it and said, no, you can't do that. Hashem wants us to keep Shemitah, and that's what, if we want to live in Eretz Yisrael, we have to follow the rules, and the rules are you have to keep Shemitah. Okay, so it was a significant argument in the late 1800s, and it's continued on and on to this day. And before I talk about the actual Heter Mechira, I have to tell you a different question that comes before it. And that's not only relevant to people who want to use Heter Mechira. I'm going to talk about the Mechira itself in a second.
And once it's sold to non-Jew, any of that produce no longer has.
That's what I'm about to talk about. And that is as follows. One of the questions that came about the Heter Mechira, it's sort of like a pre-question to the Mechira, is, does it do any good if a non-Jewish person would own it? Does that mean anything? If it's in the green, okay, it's right here, there's an Arab that owns a farm right here in the middle of the green where it's Eretz Yisrael. Does that make a difference? Or maybe it's still Shemitah produce anyhow. The rules of Shemitah maybe apply to the land. Maybe it doesn't depend who owns the land. Okay? Well, so this is a pre-question. This is, before you consider, can you do the Mechira, will do you any good if you did the Mechira? Okay? So it's a pre-question. It's like sort of like a warm-up question is there any value to doing this thing? Okay? That's the That's we're going to get to this. We're going to get to that. That has to do with the main question itself. But I'm not up to that yet. The question is, would it do you any good if you sold it? Okay? And that question is an argument that dates back approximately 400 years, 400 or 500 years. In the time of the Beis, the person who wrote the Shulchan Aruch had an argument about this. He lived in Eretz Yisrael. He lives in Israel, and he had an argument, him and other great person who lived at the time, him and the Mabit, had a large machlokes about it. A very public argument about this, to the point that they made pronouncements against it. The whole works. Very significant, very serious disagreement about this thing. It affects a lot of halachas. And what's happened is as follows. Beis Yosef, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, was of the opinion that things that grow in non-Jewish fields do not have Kedusha Shvius. Almost everyone in Israel follows that opinion. Almost everyone in Israel follows that rule. It goes by the name Yevul Machrim, produce of non-Jews. Okay, that's what Yevul Machrim means, produce of non-Jews. You'll see that also on packages. I just saw it. Someone just showed it to me a few days ago. A package from Israel that says on it, Yevul Machrim. Okay, grown from fields of non-Jews. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily it's grown from Heter Mechira. It was grown exported from a farmer who's just not Jewish. The Beis Yosef holds that that's okay. And most people in Eretz Yisrael follow that opinion, that things that grow in a non-Jewish farm are not considered to be Shemitah produce. The others, the Mabit, did not feel that way. He thought it is Shemitah produce, and the Chazon Ish followed that opinion. So in Bnei Brak, and those who follow Chazon Ish are strict, and they consider Yevul Machrim to be produce of Eretz Yisrael. They consider that to have all the rules, basically all the rules of Shemitah apply to Yevul Machrim. Okay? So this is a third question, a serious question, which is, do you treat Yevul Machrim as Shemitah produce or not as Shemitah produce? I'm not talking yet we did a mechira. I'm talking that is you just go to an Arab set area, buy peppers from them. Is that Shemitah produce or is it not Shemitah produce? And you can imagine this plays a tremendous role for people living in Israel. If you want to be able to buy produce, and we're going to talk about the Heta Mechira in a second, if you're not following Heta Mechira, what are you going to eat? Where are you going to get food from? So one of the places to get food from is you go to farms that are owned by people who are not Jewish. And you say to them, you buy the produce from them. Most people follow the Beis Yosef and say that it does not have to do Shemittah and you can buy it without a problem. It doesn't have any rules of Shemitah to it. Okay? And the Chazanish and the people, primarily people in Bnei Brak, follow the other opinion and say, no, it is considered Shemitah produce. Okay, we see that in America also. They'll say that Yevul Machrim. Someone showed me just a few days ago a picture. It was actually from Israel. A picture from Israel saying that said a Yevul Machrim. And that's what they're trying to tell you. They're telling you, we allow this because we consider produce from a non-Jewish person to not have Kedusha Shvius. If you want to be Machmir, this food is not for you. That's what they're trying to say. Okay, now, there is a little detail.
But it's still different from Heta Mechira.
Yeah, it's not Heta Mechira. I'm talking about Yevul Machrim.
Outright owned land by the
And he's owned it for the past 12 generations. You just work for someone who's not. Now, there's something very significant, which is, you can imagine that being as most people eat Yevul Machrim, and lots of people don't want to eat Heta Mechira produce, we'll talk about that in a second, if I have produce, I'm an Israeli farmer, and nobody wants to buy my produce, all I'm going to do is, I'm going to go to Ahmad and say, could you take my tomatoes and tell everybody that you're selling my tomatoes? Okay? You'll buy them, because from Ahmad you'll buy it from them, but from me you won't buy it. So I am the farmer, nobody wants to buy my tomatoes. I go to Ahmad, I say, you take my tomatoes and you sell them. So in order to buy what's called this Yevul Machrim, someone's got to watch that it really came from people who are not Jewish. Because, and not that it was that they just dropped it off the truck, just dropped it off in Ahmad's farm, and that we're buying from him. Okay? In fact, this did not go so well for Shemittah. When, in fact, they found out that a lot of the produce that was called Yevul Machrim was not Yevul Machrim. It wasn't coming from them. It was really Jewish produce that had just been shipped over to wherever, some other Arab village, and then sold as not Jewish produce. And of course, the political situation plays a role in that. How many mashgichim can go into these places? How safe is it for people to go there and make sure they're really getting Arab produce? Okay, so that plays a role in that. Okay. A fourth question, I bet you going to be 5 questions. Fourth is the Heta Mechira itself. Let's say we've gotten past the hurdle that I mentioned. We assume that if a non-Jewish person owns it, then there's no rules of Shemittah to it. Okay, so that's what we do. I have an idea. I'm going to sell my land to someone who's not Jewish. There are a number of halachic questions that whether that works or it does not work. And one of them was, what someone mentioned, is the Torah says, Lo Sechanim, you're not allowed to sell property in Eretz Yisrael to someone who's not Jewish. And the meaning of the pasuk is, the way the Gemara explains it is, you're not allowed to give non-Jewish people a foothold in Eretz Yisrael. You're not allowed to support their development of their living in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is meant for Jews, and we shouldn't give them a foothold to live in Eretz Yisrael. So you're not allowed to, according to the Torah, you're not allowed to sell them land or a place to live or a farm in Eretz Yisrael. So that was, the Chazanish said, that was his most significant challenge to the Heta Mechira, was the fact that they're violating the Isra of Lo Sechanim, and due to a technicality, the Chazanish says, and therefore the whole Mechira doesn't work. Okay, I think you're not allowed to do it. But he says, and therefore it doesn't work. We're not getting into that. Why do you think that? That's what he says. It shouldn't work because you're not allowed to sell the land. Others, the ones who allowed the Heta Mechira, disagree with that. If any of you saw, we had a video here, I'm showing it. When we get to that share of the series, I'm going to show them a clip of it. When they did the Mechira, for your curiosity, when they did the Mechira this year of selling the land, they particularly sold it to a person who keeps Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, a person who keeps the 7 mitzvahs that Goyim are supposed to keep. We have 613 mitzvahs, they have 7 mitzvahs. They sold it to a Goyim who lives in Israel, who keeps the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, and part of why they sold it to him versus somebody else is because it may be that this issue of Lo Sechanim doesn't apply when you sell it to someone like that. Okay, that's part of why they chose this person to sell the land to. Okay? So, now, there's another side, there's a flip side to what I just said. Lo Sechanim means, you're not allowed to sell them land because it gives people who are not Jewish a foothold in Israel. Eretz Yisrael is meant for you. What's the other side? The other side is, if we don't sell the land, I just said to you, where are we going to get our tomatoes from? we're going to go buy them from Ahmad. We're going to buy them from non-Jewish people who are living in Eretz Yisrael. So we're really supporting and helping them have a foothold, an economic foothold in Eretz Yisrael. We're not buying them a piece of land, but we're providing them with helping their economy in a way that helps them be more able to survive there. Okay, so that's not a violation of the technical Isra of B'Sikanim. The technical Isra is you're not allowed to sell them land to get no foothold. But there are many people who say is if the Mechira really works, if the din is that you're allowed to do it, they would prefer to buy Het Mechir produce because they don't want, they do not want to buy Arab produce because the Torah doesn't want you to give them even an economic foothold in Eretz Yisrael. This recently was in the news when the Israeli army announced that they would buy special produce for soldiers who don't want to eat from the Het Mechira. And what they were going to buy from them was produce that was grown in Arab lands. So those soldiers were happy. But the other soldiers said, wait a second, we don't want to support that. We would rather eat Het Mechir produce. So it's a difference of opinion. Some people actually say we would rather because we don't want to support those farmers. Okay. So, without getting into more details,
I think just in the interest of time, we're going to let everybody come up and finish his presentation. Any questions we can say at the end, I'm sure we'll be happy to take time for 2 minutes to ask them.
And I'm going to skip also so we can get moving. Okay. It's interesting to note that without getting into the details, more details of the Het Mechira, Rav Soloveitchik told people his opinion on the Het Mechira. He says, I have to tell you something. He says, without talking about is it mutter or usher, does it work or does it not work? He said this. No one dreamt of making a mechira until they found the Jews were in such a desperate situation. The Yidden who were living in the late 1800s were in a desperate situation. Let's say that continues to be nowadays, that it's so difficult for them to keep Shemittah. Yes or no is a question. But let's say it does. It's because of the difficult situation that it was brought up the idea to make a mechira. But no one would have dreamt otherwise to make a mechira. He says, therefore, if you live in Israel and you are a farmer and you're going to starve, or you're concerned you're going to starve if you don't have a Het Mechira, that's what the question is about. He says, I don't live in Israel. He says, I live in America. He says, what's the difficulty for me that I have to rely on Het Mechira? The whole Het Mechira, the Mechira was made for people who are in a desperate situation. I got loads of peppers in the fruit store. Why do I have to buy the Israeli one? What's the pressure on me that I say, oh no, if I don't buy this, if I don't do this, what's going to happen? Either I won't have peppers or I'll buy the other peppers. Why is it such a difficulty? So he came from a different perspective. He said, let's not talk about whether it's mutter or usher. He says, that's an Israeli question. We don't live in Israel. We're just Americans thinking about buying it. He says, for us, we don't need to buy it. That's sort of it was that statement which serves as the basis why, our basis for why most of the American hashgachos will not allow produce from the Het Mechira. That is to say, even if personally they hold that the Het Mechira is okay, they will not allow it because they say, we don't have that pressure, that difficulty, which is even the whole basis for the Mechira. Okay, so I'm going to speed along because we are running out of time. And one more question about the Het Mechira, which is, I'm sure people have thought about, is if I feel that it's acceptable to eat produce from the Het Mechira, I rely on it and it's fine, I'm allowed to eat that produce. How do I know if the produce I'm buying came from the Het Mechira? I walk into the food store, and I see a person, and it says on it, produce of Israel. How do I know if those people participated in the Mechira or they didn't? Now, if you live in Israel, you would know. Because in Israel, food stores have hashgacha. A food store has to have a rabbi to give hashgacha, because you have to also do separations of Jews and Maestras. There's rules of oral that are more strict in Israel. But in America, you don't know, it just says produce of Israel. How do I know if this person did a Mechira? What I mean is, in the fruit store in Israel, the rabbi who certifies the store is going to make sure the farmer sold it to have the Mechira. How do I know if the person did? So I did a little checking. And according to the people in the rabbinate who make the Mechira, they told me that 80% of the farmers participate in the Het Mechira. 80% of the farmers. Now I argued back to them that I looked at their list of farmers, and as of just after Rosh Hashanah, there were 5,423 farmers who had signed up for the Mechira, of which they tell me there are only a total of 5,500 farmers in Israel. Okay, so to me it was an awful lot more than 80%. Okay, we've been negotiating on which number is right. But I said, look, I counted. I mean, I didn't count it. It's self-counted for me. But I mean, I counted, and there were 5,423 people signed on. Sure sounds even more than 80%. And now I have to tell you something. Even with that number of 80%, the people who keep Shemittah, which is the people who I spoke to from the Keren Hashviyas, who help support farmers who want to keep Shemittah. Depending on who you ask over there, either 13 or 19% of the farmers keep Shemittah in Eretz Yisrael. So even if you say 80%, together with another 13 or 19%, we've got just about everybody covered. Okay? Everybody in Eretz Yisrael is either keeping Shemittah or in the Het Mechira. It sure seems like that we're basically covered just about everything. Okay, I'm going to skip parts about doing work in Eretz Yisrael, and a fifth shiloh that I was going to talk about, just for the sake of time. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything else important. Okay, I'm talking about even that whole idea of supporting farmers. I was going to talk about that also for a different time. Okay, if a person owns an apartment in Eretz Yisrael, they have to deal with a number of shilohs. The first is what someone had mentioned. If they have potted plants in their house, you have a flower pot growing in your apartment, how do you treat that plant as far as Shemittah goes? So the rule is as follows. If you meet two qualifications, you don't have to worry about Shemittah for that plant. And that is, first of all, it needs to be indoors. Not on the porch. It needs to be indoors. Second is, it needs to be in a pot that qualifies as what's called the Atzis She'ein Nakav, a pot that has no hole to it. What does that take to qualify for that? The easiest way to qualify for that is to have a pot that's made out of plastic that has no hole in the bottom of it. Okay? That's the easiest way to qualify. Or to put the pot onto a plate that's plastic or glass. Those are all fine. Okay? You run into difficulties in one of two situations. Either if it's a ceramic pot, or it's a pot where the leaves hang over the pot. Again, I don't have it. If this is the pot, okay, and the flowers are draping over the sides, the parts that drape over are not, so to speak, in the pot. Okay? They don't qualify. Many are of the opinion that as long as you're not on the first floor, you're safe. Okay? That's considered to be enough off the ground. If it's indoors and you're off the first floor, you're safe, and that plant does not have any rules of Shemittah to it. If you're on the first floor, then you have to ask questions about what kind of pot you need. And you for sure, if you take it outside, then you run into issues. Okay, so if you have flowers growing in the apartment, you're okay. You don't have any special rules to it. If you want to have that pot outside, you want to have the pot you're on the first floor, you have more questions to it. I didn't get to talk about what you are and not allowed to do. It's rather complicated. You need to ask a question for that. Actually, you need to ask a shiloh to a rabbi for that question. The next is, what happens if you have a garden outside of your apartment? Okay, I have an apartment, I have a house, and outside there's grass, there's flowers and things growing. I'm going to give you the basic rule without the details because we really got to move along. The basic rule is as follows. You're not allowed to plant anything. That's also the right. You're not allowed to plant anything. Almost everything else that you'd want to do in your garden, cutting, weeding, watering, pruning, almost everything else that you want to do, except that they're grapes. Okay? Almost everything else you want to do in your garden has the following rule. If it's to maintain the tree that you have, to keep it growing the way that it is, you're allowed to do it. If it's to help it grow better, if it's to improve it, you're not allowed to do it. And if, for example, in Eretz Yisrael, I have a book here if you want to look at it, Sefer, if you want to look at it. It tells you how much watering you should do for your plants. Because you're allowed to water it to keep it from dying. You're allowed to water it to keep it as is. You're not allowed to water it just to help it in its overall growth. So that means that you don't just turn on your sprinkler and let it just run for an hour straight. You have to think about how much your sprinkler is allowed to be on. Fertilization, an amount that keeps it from dying. If it needs it to keep the tree from dying or to keep the fruit from rotting, you'd be allowed to, but not more than that. Okay? And if you want all the gory details, that chapter in the Sefer was written by an agronomist, okay, who helped them understand how much you have to do. Okay. Another question that's come up is, okay, I don't have a garden, but my building does. Okay, the building has grass around it, and the building, there are some people who are of the opinion that if you live in such a building and they're not keeping Shemitah in your building, then you should renounce your ownership to the land outside the building. Okay? That's not accepted that you have to do that. But you should vote in what's called the Vada Bayis. Okay, you should vote in the I don't know what you call it. What? The council, whatever you call it, the building council, it's called the Vada Bayis. What? The association. You should vote to keep Shemittah. The Rabbanut has booklets that teach buildings how to keep Shemittah in their buildings. It's not unheard of in Israel to keep Shemittah, that your garden should be taken care of properly. Okay, so it's not unheard of, and it's a person, you should be voting for that. Okay, let me move on. Okay, the people in Eretz Yisrael, we talk a lot about things having Kedusha Shvius, having the rules of Shemitah. People who come across produce that has the rules of Shemitah either come from what's called, I didn't talk about it, I'm sorry, from Oitzer Bezdin, which is, it's a way of people getting produce that has Kedusha Shvius. Now, what are the rules of how you eat something that has Kedusha Shvius? The main rule is, you can eat it, you can't waste it. Not only can you eat it, you have to eat it in the most, in what's considered to be an acceptable, proper way to use it, a best way to use it, not the best, our best way to use it without ruining it. Okay, so I have some toys here to show you an example of that. Okay, if you have, a person's got a lemon, okay? If this was, none of this is from Eretz Yisrael. If this is from Eretz Yisrael, okay, if you take a lemon, and you want to eat if I took a slice of lemon and I wanted to suck on it, eat a wedge of a lemon, you're not allowed to do that. Because it's not the typical way to use lemons. Lemons are used for their juice. People don't eat lemons as is. You couldn't suck on a lemon. Who sucks on lemons? Okay? I'll talk to my kids. Okay? Who sucks on lemons? Okay? People who are vitamin C deficient. So you all heard of Lyme's. Okay? People who suck on it because they need vitamin C. If that's considered only for sick people, you're not allowed to do that. So, you would not, that would be not a not permitted way to use it. It's not the best way to use it. On the other hand, now I said to you, you're not allowed to waste it. Okay, so when I cut the lemon, there's residue of the lemon on the knife. So the thing is, you have to save anything that the most frugal person, people who are most careful about how they treat produce, would care about. Okay? Nobody in this day and age cares about the little bit of residue that's left on the knife. And therefore, you could rinse off the knife, and there's no isser. Even when I just did that, okay, I just wasted that. Okay, no one's going to eat that anymore. But I'm not responsible to that extent. I only have to do it to the extent that someone cares about, who's very careful about their food that they have in their house, would do something. Nobody in our day and age would care about that little bit that was left on the knife. You could rinse that off. You could wash it. Okay, so now, if I'm allowed to use, I'm allowed to use the lemon in the way that's typically used. For a lemon, that means I could use it for juicing. So if I want, I could use my lemon into something. Excuse me. That I'm allowed to do. Okay. I couldn't, and I could use lemon juice to make this and things like that. I could stick it to my drink. There are some people who use lemon juice to take out stains. Okay? There are some people who put lemon juice into their hair because it helps bring up the highlights in their hair. Okay? You're not allowed to do that. Those are not the typical ways that you use. Those are not the typical ways that you use a lemon. That's not, and therefore you're not allowed to do that. Okay? Many people, whatever. Okay. Fine. Now I finished. I finished my drink. Okay, now, the last little bit of liquid in there, again, only for people, nobody was even particular about how they treat things, would care about those last little drops. I could pour that out. Had I left a few ounces in there, I couldn't throw that out. Because there are people who would care about that. They would just leave it on the counter for later. Okay? What about my rind that I have over here? Okay? This is the left out, squeezed out lemon over here. So, there are people who take lemon rind and use it for baking. Okay, that's considered a typical use of using lemon rinds. I can't throw it out. I don't have to eat it. I don't have to make a cake with the rind that's left over. But I'm not allowed to waste it. Okay? So there's two basic ways of treating produce or Shemitah. That's basically leftovers that I don't want to eat, but it's not spoiled. Once it's spoiled, I can throw it out. And until it's spoiled, I don't want to eat this anymore. What am I supposed to do with it? If I throw it in the garbage, I've just ruined it. No one's going to take it out of the garbage and make a cake out of it. So I can't throw it in the garbage. Okay? So there's two basic ways to deal with it. Okay? The old way, the traditional way of dealing with it was put it in a Ziploc bag, close, well, they didn't have Ziploc bags. Put it into a bag, close the bag, and then you put it into the garbage. Okay? The reason why that's permitted is because I'm only indirectly causing it to be destroyed. While it's in the bag, it's still okay. Actually, in the bag, in the garbage, it's still okay also. Theoretically, you can take it out like that. Eventually, it's going to get compacted by the garbage truck, and all kinds of things are going to have to do it. But that's too indirect. I'm allowed to do it. And that's the way people used to do it. They put it into a bag, put it into the garbage, they were done. The more modern, upgraded way to deal with it is they have Shemittah bins. Okay? And that is, they keep it in a container, okay, and they leave it here until it gets to the point that nobody would eat it anymore. Okay? They have a Shemittah bin. Okay? We'll leave it here for now. We're not finished with it. Okay. Where's my cup? Okay, so these little drops here, this is nothing. You don't have to care about this. Okay. What happens if I had a lemon instead? I was working with an apple. Okay, so for starters, I don't think that a typical use of an apple is to make baked apples. There is such a way of using it. I don't think that's a typical way of using it, and therefore the idea is you're not allowed to cook things that are usually eaten raw. So I'm not allowed to make a baked apple because, at least to my understanding, that's not a typical way. It doesn't have to be the most typical, it's not a typical way, you're not allowed to do that. However, I can peel it, okay, because even though not everybody peels it, that's considered standard enough that people peel apples. I could peel it now.
Apple pie.
What? So bake with it, I bet you could do that. Yes, you could do that, because if that's a typical way to bake with it. But to just take a baked apple, I'm going to... That was my reading of it. My reading of it says not a typical. If you tell me that you think that it's typical that people eat baked apples, that's a common enough use, then you are allowed to. Okay, this is for demonstration purposes. Okay, if you have to justify what's considered typical. If you say, Rabbi, you go back to the books. I know how to cook. Everybody makes baked apples, and that's fine. Okay, don't worry about that. Don't feel. I'm not sorry. Okay, so I can peel the apple. Whoops. Now, I can juice the apple. Most people eat apple juice. I'm allowed to juice an apple. I can eat it raw. Okay, when I peel the apple, the peel is still perfectly edible. Okay, so even though I don't want to eat the peel, I can't throw out the peel because the peel is still perfectly edible and not something that you can't. If I throw it in the garbage, I just wasted it. Okay, so I can throw it out. Now, I got another problem. If I take my apple and I put it into my Shemittah bin, okay, what's going to happen here is the lemons are not affected by throwing an apple into there. Okay? I would suspect that if I put it into here, the apple is not so tasty anymore. Okay? Once I mix it with the lemons. So what happens is, if you want to go to the root of having a Shemittah bin, you don't have to have a Shemittah bin. You have to have a Shemittah bin, plural, because you have to think about it. Wait a second. Does the apple go with the lemon? I don't know about that. And what happens now this sits here for 2 days? Well, tomorrow I have something else to throw out. Well, you know what? This is starting to rot. If this is starting to spoil and I put that stuff into here, well, then I'm ruining that stuff that I just put into here. Because by putting it into here, this stuff is sort of rotten. Well, not rotten enough that I want to throw it out, but sort of rotten. Okay, so I put another bin and I have to have a third bin. So it gets a little bit complicated. Well,
you can't do the bad thing still.
yes, the bad thing is the traditional way that it was done. Each time you finish something, you have a bowl of salad, okay, and there was some salad left over, okay. You don't want to save it tomorrow, but you can't throw it out either. Put it into a bag, chuck it into the garbage. That was the way that it was always done. That was the way it was done. It's considered, so to speak, an upgrade, the way they do it nowadays with Shemittah bins, but it runs into its own complications, because all of a sudden you can have a whole shelf full of Shemittah bins over here. You know, everyone's at different stages of production over here, you know, everything's moving along. So there are some people who do a compromise. What they do is, they have a Shemittah bin, and every day at the end of the day, they dump everything into a bag and throw it out. Okay? It's like a day, every day they have a new one, it's like a recycling bin, you know, you put everything into it, at the end of the day, you throw it all out. There's different ways to do that. Now, if I kept peeling my apple, I'm not going to make you sit through the whole thing. If I kept peeling, okay, what do you think about this? What do you think I should do with this? What?
Someone who cares to eat that.
Yes, some people care about it, not only, but some people care about it eat it. I actually watched somebody yesterday, just for curiosity. I was watching somebody eating an apple, and they really ate well. But guess what? If instead of slicing it, I had eaten it around, Okay, not everybody slices an apple. Some people just eat the whole apple. They would eat much more than this. Okay, so this can't be thrown out. This is something that people would still eat. Okay, now what happens, I'm not going to do this for you, but what happens if I ate it down to basically what nobody would eat anymore? Then we run to a different side, and that is as follows. Remember I told you that not only does food for humans have Kedusha Shvius, food for animals does also. Well, I might not eat the pits and the last little bits of it, but would an animal eat it? Is it still fit for animals at that point? So it comes to the following side, very interesting question, which is like this. If you look at the din, it says, this is considered to be animal food, and you have to chew the Kedusha Shvius stuff. But, guess what? None of us here got a cow or a sheep in the backyard to feed it to. Now, maybe some of you have a dog, and you say, okay, I'll have a dog, and I can feed it to the dog. But I don't know if dogs are allowed to eat apple pits. I don't remember. But there are people who live in big cities don't have animals. So it's a question, whether they have to follow the rules that things that are fit for animals have to do shvius, because not fit for animals. Nobody cares about the leftover apple cores. They throw in garbage. Nobody in this city cares about that. If I had animals, I would care about it. But if I was running a potato chip factory, I would take my potato peels and feed them to animals. That's what they do. But if I'm a housekeeper and I'm making potato kugel, I don't save the potato peels to feed to a cow. I throw them in the garbage. So are potato peels really have to be kept because they're safe for animals? Or do we say, come on, in the city, nobody has animals, nobody keeps them. Now, potato peels might be a little different because they're actually quite difficult. But that's the idea is when I have something that's left that's only fit for animals, that's a question whether you do or don't. We'll start making on that question. Okay, then now I'm about to wind down. There are a bunch of other examples. Just to put it to your head, that how not to waste or use things in an improper way. If I want to use oil to light Shabbos candles, I'm allowed to do that. Because that's considered a typical use for olive oil, is to use it for making lights. That's considered common enough to use, you're allowed to do that. I'm not allowed to use oil for Hanukkah candles. Because the rule is on Hanukkah candles, you're not allowed to have any benefit from the light that comes from it. Shabbos candles, you're allowed to. So you're not allowed to, so what you're doing is, you're taking this oil and using it with it and no one can have benefit from it. I'm also allowed to use the oil for frying, but I can't use oil for frying if I have a non-stick pan. I'm using just a tiny bit to keep it from sticking. Because that oil is not serving a food function. It's just serving as a lubricant to protect my pan. If I put enough oil that it helps my food taste good, I'm allowed to do that. If I use it in tiny, tiny bits just to protect my pan, then I'm not allowed to do that. So I'm mentioning that example because I want you to just be aware that people who are deeply involved in keeping Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael, I don't mean you walk into a food store and bought a carrot. You bought a carrot, you have to know, you know what? I can eat the carrot. I can't juice the carrot. I have to save the top of it because people eat that. I have to save the peel. That's what I have to do. But the people who are living their day-to-day, who have to deal with Shemitah, who have Shemitah produce long-term, the whole year, have very significant sets of halachas that they have to be familiar with. We should always be living there and to continue to be able to keep all these mitzvahs in the way they're supposed to. Thank you.